to do so today. Can you think of an example of how you are already putting some of Krashen's theories into practice? For our first virtual session together, jot down some notes, comments, or questions about any of Krashen's theories. We will have time for discussion when we are together. As mentioned earlier, the naturalistic approach also emerged from Krashen's ideas. Authentic interaction is needed for the naturalistic approach to be successful. Look back at the standard and its emphasis on authentic interaction as well. Naturalistic implies immersion in the second language. Language is acquired gradually through immersion with native speakers as their learners' needs demand. The language input learners hear must be comprehensible, relevant to context, and repeated as needed. Let's think back to first language learning and what research indicates. As a child, how do we learn our first language? Are we conjugating verbs and identifying tenses? The answer is no, naturally. Language learning starts when we are infants. Some examples of the ways in which language develops. Children are surrounded by the language. They hear a great deal of speaking before they ever try to speak themselves. Their skills appear very gradually over time. Sounds, words, and meanings begin to emerge. Once they begin to interact with parents, siblings, and others, the baby's brain begins to pick up on patterns. They connect specific words to facial expressions and model their use from those around them. They receive feedback and begin to put specific words in context. They then begin to experiment. Mistakes are often made without correction. People sometimes laugh and even think this is cute. Fluent speakers may adjust their own language so they can better understand. They quickly learn to use their language skills to express their needs and make sense of the world. There is no one handing them worksheets or explaining grammar rules. By the age of 3, language is being used fluently. This is the natural way that children learn a language, the naturalistic theory, and has implications for second language learning and instruction as well. What may make the naturalistic approach difficult for our students? Is the naturalistic approach enough? Is immersion alone enough? Is complete immersion even possible for our students? The reality is, class time is not enough. Children take years to acquire their first language. There is not enough exposure or intensity of exposure to acquire fluency with immersion alone. Adults are not able to duplicate the exact natural acquisition of a child due to physiological differences. Children use a neurological pathway, whereas adults are using a cognitive one. Adults benefit from instruction that does point out language patterns, for example. People may have proficiency in certain areas. For example, their language may be contextualized for their particular work, but outside of the workplace, their proficiency and comfort level are much decreased. Using the naturalistic approach and recalling the language development progression we have discussed, what kinds of activities could be incorporated into your instructional practices to provide a more authentic, relevant learning environment for your students? We can see how the naturalistic approach has value, but that there are other things a second language instructor can do besides simply immersing the student in a rich language environment and providing comprehensible input. Dr. Merrill Swain theorized that not only do adult students need comprehensible input in a relaxed and supportive environment, they need communicative tasks that push them to actually produce and use language to make themselves understood. When you consider output, think about speaking and writing, pushed output. Swain also hypothesized that through language production, language learners notice patterns and communication breakdowns. They try out different things until they get it right, and then internalize the elements of the language they are learning. Think about an example of an activity or approach that would push a student to produce language to make him or herself understood. How or why might this language production exercise help a learner internalize the language? Again, jot down some notes, comments, or questions about any of Swain's theories. We will have time for discussion when we are together. In the 1990s, Dr. Michael Long developed the interaction hypothesis. The interaction hypothesis emphasizes the importance of giving learners many authentic opportunities for negotiation of meaning with another person or text. In authentic interaction, learners encounter communication problems. Their negotiation of the problem provides feedback to both speakers on what needs to be modified to make it comprehensible. The language in an authentic interaction is not derived from a textbook, but emerges from the immediate communication needs of the students. If you think of interactions you have every day, you realize that communication breakdowns happen all of the time, even among native speakers. We all use strategies to resolve these. In SLA, these strategies are called negotiation for meaning. We modify our language according to who we are talking to, or the topic and the context. And we simplify, repeat, clarify, and rephrase. Think about situations where you have had to negotiate meaning or modify your language to allow your learners or a conversation partner to better understand. Do you have an example of a student activity that might provide for this opportunity? Again, jot down some notes, comments, or questions about any of Swain's theories. Take some time to consider what we have discussed here today. In preparation for our first virtual session, reflect on the questions that have been asked during this brief presentation. Also, take some time with the following questions and be prepared to discuss them at our session. What final thoughts or questions do you have on these main research theories? Which of the theories or theorists speak to you? Which might you like more information on? How might this theoretical information impact your practice? These theories and approaches are not exclusive. You will not teach solely an audiolingual, structure-based curriculum or a naturalistic curriculum. An effective teacher interweaves approaches to provide the instructional tools needed to meet the needs of his or her students. Don't forget to consider the questions and reflections included in this presentation for discussion when we are together. Thank you.
Bye for now, Joe Harris.
There are at least 40 SLA theories and theorists who have contributed significantly to the SLA field of study. Are we going to discuss them all here? No. For the purposes of this course, we will be discussing these three. Accompanying this section of the course is a handy reference chart that will help you to recognize and recall the various theories and approaches to be discussed. Please print it and keep it as a reference. We will start with Dr. Stephen Krashen. Dr. Krashen is most closely associated with the naturalistic approach. He had several hypotheses, three of which we are going to touch upon today: comprehensible input, affective filter, learning versus acquisition. The crux of his input hypothesis is that first and second, sometimes third and fourth, language learners require plenty of comprehensible language input. This opened the minds of teachers in the field to come up with strategies for modeling language and talking to students in a way and at a level that would make it easier for students to understand and follow along. Comprehensible is the key. The affective filter is what Krashen refers to when discussing a student's emotional state while learning. Confidence, motivation, and anxiety levels impact a student's ability to let comprehensible input in. He also made the distinction between language learning and language acquisition. Language learning is when you are thinking about the language. Acquisition is when you are using the language. Dr. Merrill Swain developed the output hypothesis, focusing on pushed output and noticing hypothesis testing and internalizing language learning. Not only do adult students need a comprehensible input in a relaxed and supportive classroom, they need communicative tasks that push them to actually produce and use language to make themselves understood. Swain hypothesized that through language production, language learners notice patterns and communication breakdowns. They try out different things until they get it right and then internalize these elements of the language they are learning. Our final theorist we will discuss today is Dr. Michael Long. In the 1990s, Dr. Michael Long developed the interaction hypothesis. A combination between the input and output hypotheses, the interaction hypothesis emphasizes the importance of giving learners many authentic opportunities for negotiation of meaning. In authentic interaction, learners encounter communication problems. Their negotiation of the problem provides feedback to both speakers on what needs to be modified to make it comprehensible. The language in an authentic interaction is not derived from a textbook, but emerges from the immediate communication needs of students. These are often referred to as teachable moments. If you think of interaction you have every day, you realize that communicative breakdowns happen all of the time, even among native speakers. We all use strategies to resolve these issues. In SLA, these strategies are called negotiation for meaning. We modify our language according to who we are talking to, the topic, and the context. We simplify, repeat, clarify, and rephrase. These strategies are not exclusive to language acquisition, but are found in the interaction hypothesis, where the focus is on negotiation for meaning and modifying language. As with the research and theories, there are hundreds of approaches to addressing SLA in the classroom. Today we are going to focus on 4 major instructional approaches. Do not feel badly if their official name is not familiar. You will definitely recognize the components that make up each of them as we discuss them further. First, let's take a look at the naturalistic approach. In the naturalistic approach, language features are not presented in a step-by-step manner. Learner errors are not corrected. There is extensive immersion with native speakers. The focus is on communicating meaning, and input is comprehensible, relevant to immediate context, and repeated as necessary. Authentic interaction is required for the naturalistic approach to be successful. Look back at the standard and its emphasis on authentic interaction as well. Adult second language learners can learn language in this way. Is this the gold standard for language learning? Think about your students for a moment. What are their needs? Using the naturalistic approach, what kinds of activities could be incorporated into your instructional practices to provide more authentic, relevant learning? Some examples include newspapers, TV, movies, project work, problem solving, meaningful content, addressing real student needs such as going to a doctor's appointment or food shopping, parent-teacher conferences, assignments that require conversation with native speakers. What other activities might you be able to include in your classroom? In looking at the naturalistic approach, what might make this approach difficult for our students? Is immersion alone enough? Is immersion possible for all our students? The reality is class time is not enough. There is not enough exposure or intensity of exposure to acquire fluency with immersion alone. Adults are not able to duplicate the exact natural acquisition of a child due to physiological differences. Children use a neurological pathway, whereas adults use a cognitive one. Adults benefit from instruction that does point out language patterns, for example. People also may have proficiency in silos. For example, their language may be contextualized for their particular work, but outside of the workplace, their proficiency and comfort level are much decreased. Over time, many approaches to SLA instruction have been identified and used in the classroom. In the audiolingual approach, it focuses on listen and repeat, worksheet and drills, teacher-directed instruction, and memorization. Earlier theories were developed from the psychological theory of behaviorism, which we will talk more about during Webinar 1. It is believed that language was a behavior and the acquisition was a matter of habit formation. The teacher really presents a model of a correct sentence. The student repeats and memorizes that properly formed sentence without really any true understanding of the meaning. This is called the audiolingual method and is still used today, referred to as the Pimsleur method. Let's take a look at when this approach might be the best approach. For example, you can use ALA when reciting a script to aid fluency, encouraging some memorization, or for choral repetition for speaking and pronunciation practice. This is a good exercise for students not comfortable with speaking aloud in class. Another approach that has been used in SLA instruction is the structure-based approach. In the structure-based approach, the focus is on grammar rules, vocabulary lists, worksheets, predetermined order of instruction, teacher-directed instruction, and there's a greater focus on learning about the language and less on how to use it. The rules and the vocabulary of the language are taught discreetly apart from any actual communicative activity, conjugating verbs, grammar, and translation methods. Like ALA, the techniques used in structure-based approach are not bad per se. People need to know that there are grammatical rules, and these skills do help develop accuracy of speech and self-editing while writing. It has its limitations and certainly does not mirror how we actually learn our first language. These approaches are not exclusive. You will not teach solely on a structure-based curriculum or a naturalistic curriculum. These approaches are interwoven to provide the instructional tools needed to meet the needs of our students. The input, output, and interaction hypotheses have led to the development of the communicative approach and teaching methods. This approach can be identified by the following characteristics. Links classroom content with genuine communication needs outside of the classroom. Considers learner motivation, confidence, and anxiety levels. Emphasizes interaction. Models appropriate language through comprehensible input. Uses authentic texts. Relies on communicative tasks that allow students to negotiate meaning. And integrates meaning and form. For clarification on integrating meaning and form, here, meaning is what we want to say, and form is how we say it. When integrating, we focus on both, emphasizing one over the other at different times for different purposes. An example of this might be English language learners in the process of writing. In early drafts, the focus is on content. Later drafts, the focus shifts to form. We don't overemphasize accuracy in the communicative approach, and when we do focus on form, we do so in the context of meaningful, authentic communication. Remember, these are just the tip of the iceberg when discussing SLA theories and approaches. If you have a favorite theory or approach that you find particularly useful, bring it along to the follow-up webinar and share it with your peers. Excellent instruction uses multiple theories in conjunction with one another, and the approaches you use in your instruction will be determined by the students you have in front of you.
Hi, my name's Jo Harris, and today's blog we're going to be looking at learning theory applications and my reflections. So there's 4 main learning theories we're going to look at today. One is behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and connectivism. Lots of isms there, so they're tongue twisters, but we'll see how we go. So let's look at the first one, which is behaviorism. And it's based on behavioral psychology from the 1950s, and it's a classic Pavlov's dog. And if you don't know about that, you can Google it, but I won't get into it now for the sake of time. And that basically students learn through practice, reshaping what they learn, and positive experiences. The teacher's role is to create a series of steps in programmed instructions with a predefined end, and my role is really that of a supervisor, because the goal is that I will, as a teacher, will know that the student has learned because I've observed a change in their behaviour, and that the children change their behaviour because they attribute it internally. So they know that they feel good about learning. And some examples of this are online quizzes where you get tested on or quizzed on facts, concepts and skills, and drills and practice, and a reward system. And I know my daughter is in grade 2, and they've got this great reward system involving stickers, which they again get to trade in for gifts and stuff like that. So I think, it's also known as behaviourist model, but my reflection on this is that it seems to me to be a very foundational way of an introduction to learning. Great for the primary, the little babies in schooling, to get them to feel good about learning, to create some foundation tracks in their brain that learning equates to feeling good and rewards. So let's look at the next one, which is cognitivism. It's also known as cognitivist, and it's based on the work of Paget, which is a 3-stage processing of sensory, memory, and long-term memory, and the work of J. Anderson, which is on 2 types of memory, which is declarative and procedural. I won't get into those for the sake of time again, but the students learn through mental processing. That is how information is processed. So it's about enabling the students and that they inquire strategies to process information. And the teacher, my job as a teacher using this theory of learning is to attain and maintain my learners' attention and be a modeler of those thinking strategies, because the goal here is to change the students' mental behaviour, because they learn how to think in a way. So the rehearsals, visual aids, repetition and review overview and summarising and mind mapping tools are some examples of ways that you could and bring this theory to life in my classroom, and also by the use of mnemonics. And my reflection here, I think it's a very important tool to grow into being a great learner and a student of tomorrow. So I see this as a core foundation skill development way of using this theory. Now, the next one is social constructivism. It's also known as learner-centered learning, and it's based on the work of Vygotsky, who's known for his zone of proximal development, and Jay Bruner, where learning is an active process. And the students learn through construction of knowledge, through socialising, and they really need to be self-led, so there needs to be some maturity here in the learner. And the teacher's role is to pose leading questions, group students to learn through and with each other, and really be a facilitator, because the goal is to create lifelong sticky learning experiences. And the examples of ways that I could bring this theory to life in my classroom is through the use of group discussion, for example, and group tasks. So my reflection on this tool is it's great for upper school and great for kids, even littlies, who can do a project together on a computer or something. And to me, it's a skill that's needed in preparation for connectivism theory of learning. So let's have a look at connectivism, which is the last one. It's also known as digital age learning, and it's about learning as a creative process. And the students learn through informal network technology enabled environments, and that they connect information because they have a desire to know more, and that they have the decision making skills about learning deciding for themselves what they need to learn. And the teacher's role is to nurture those connections between fields, people and organisations, for example. And the goal here is that the students are able to do something, that they actually learn, and then there's an actuation that they actually produce something. And some examples of ways that I could bring this to life in my classroom is through the use of coursework, email, use of forums, blogs, YouTube, and this is a great example, this blog right here. I'm learning information and I'm producing something with it. I'm just not learning it for the sake of learning it and knowing it for myself. So how can I take this knowledge and give it back to the world? So my reflection is, bam, this is the goods. I love it. Okay, well, that's it for me this week, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye for now. Jo Harris.
There are at least 40 SLA theories and theorists who have contributed significantly to the SLA field of study. Are we going to